Chapter 1. Ghost Comes Home. The plane touched down at 3:17 a.m. Douglas Lacey didn't flinch as the landing gear screamed against the tarmac. He'd been through worse. A lot worse. His eyes scanned the runway from the cabin window, the shadows of hangars and transport trucks blending into the black canvas of the night. Another silent return. No fanfare. No handshake. Just his rucksack, dog tags, and a clearance code the government would deny existed. He walked off the C-17 with the gait of a man who'd carried death on his back for 6 months and didn't even sweat under the weight. Kazakhstan had been hell, a scorched earth covert op that even his own team couldn't fully know. Burned villages, black sites, and enemies wearing friendly faces. And yet here he was, alive, sharp, dangerous, back in the States, back to his so-called life. He didn't bother calling anyone. Hell, he didn't even know if his phone plan still worked. All he knew was that his last message home, sent through a burner military satellite uplink, read, "Alive, coming home, tell Rose." He hadn't heard back. At 4:05 a.m., Douglas stepped out of the taxi in front of his suburban Virginia home. The street was quiet. Too quiet. Not even the neighborhood's obsessive lawn guy was out yet. No porch lights. No cars parked awkwardly on the curb. Nothing. Just the weight of early morning fog and the eerie stillness of domestic life. A world he never really belonged to. The front door stood unlocked. That was the first red flag. Douglas entered like a man trained for ambushes, hand resting just near his waistband, where a concealed holster would usually sit. The house smelled dead. Not rotten. Not foul. Just empty. Like someone had tried to erase the scent of life. His boots hit the hardwood with soft thuds. Step by step, room by room, clear, sweep, check corners. He didn't even realize he was doing it. Old habits don't die. They just wait in the shadows. Then he saw it. On the kitchen island, under the soft glow of the oven's digital clock, a manila envelope. Thick, heavy. It looked more like a dossier drop than a family document. He approached slowly, peered inside. Divorce papers. Wow, he muttered, eyes scanning the legal jargon like a sniper would scan a rooftop. You didn't even wait for the dirt to settle on my boots. Beside the envelope was a note. Simple, handwritten in Rose's looping cursive. It's not working anymore, Doug. I can't be married to a ghost. You're always gone, and even when you're here, you're not. Kenneth understands me in ways you never did. This is for the best. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Kenneth. Douglas chuckled, low and bitter. Kenneth Richmond, the smug, slick-haired, high-end defense attorney who always smelled like imported cologne and cheap power. The same guy who spent every barbecue making subtle jabs at Douglas's military service. Too cowardly to say it out loud. Too arrogant to keep his hands off another man's wife. Richmond was also Gregory Stevens' protege. Gregory, Douglas's father-in-law. A man who'd never hid his disdain. To him, Douglas had always been the dirtbag soldier who wasn't good enough for his daughter. A pawn with a gun and nothing more. Now it all made sense. The tension before he deployed. Rose's cold stares. Her fake smiles. The lack of calls. The delayed letters. The silence. He'd been ghosted. Literally. Douglas stood still for a moment, breathing deeply through his nose. He didn't rage. He didn't shout. That wasn't his style. Emotion was for people with time to waste, and Douglas had spent a lifetime turning pain into precision. He reached up and pulled the chain off his neck, the one with his wedding band on it. With quiet resolve, he dropped it into the sink. Clink. Upstairs, the master bedroom was stripped bare. Her clothes gone, her vanity empty. Their photos? Replaced with blank frames, like she'd scrubbed the house of their entire history together. Only the guest room looked untouched. In it, a few of his old belongings, his framed bronze star, his shadow box with service medals, the stitched flag his daughter had given him before his first deployment. Holly's handwriting was still scrawled across the back of it. Come home safe, Daddy. Love you always. That was before she turned 11. Before everything changed. Douglas swallowed hard, suddenly more tired than he'd been in months. But he didn't sit. His mind was already moving faster than grief could catch him. Why the rush to move out? Why now of all times? He hadn't even told anyone his return date. He was supposed to still be deployed another 3 weeks, which meant, she knew, someone inside the system told her, which meant someone inside the system wanted her out of here before he returned. That wasn't just betrayal. That was a setup. The clock on the microwave read 4:27 a.m. Douglas poured a glass of water. Sat at the island. Divorce papers still open, like a sick joke. The silence around him was deafening now. Not the calm kind. The kind that comes before a storm tears through the roof. A low rumble outside. Headlights flared across the blinds. Douglas stood slowly, glass still in hand, and stepped toward the front door. Another car. Another set of lights. 3, no, for vehicles. Black. No neighborhood branding. Unmarked. Government issue. He didn't need a weapon to know what this was. Trouble. A knock. Hard. Authoritative. No doorbell. No greeting. Douglas opened the door, every instinct firing, but his face a blank mask. What greeted him was a line of uniforms, suits, and a tall man with a U.S. Marshal badge clipped to his belt. Douglas Lacey? Depends on who's asking, Douglas said coolly, his voice gravel but calm. The Marshal didn't flinch. Welcome home, soldier. You're under arrest for murder. Chapter 2. The Betrayal Trifecta. The handcuffs clicked tight. Too tight. Douglas didn't flinch. The cold steel biting into his wrists wasn't half as sharp as the chill settling in his chest. 6 months in enemy territory. Not one scratch. 6 minutes back home, and he was in cuffs like some corner store thug. The U.S. Marshal barked out orders behind him while officers cleared the house. No warrant shown. No Miranda rights read. Just brute confidence and a badge that screamed, "You're not in charge anymore." Douglas stood there on his own front porch, barefoot, shirt still damp from the shower he never got to take, staring out at the dark horizon as if daring it to blink first. The neighbors started peeking from windows. Curtains rustled. Phones lifted. He could almost hear their thoughts. Guess the soldier finally snapped. Knew he looked off all those missions. Rose said he had PTSD. Probably killed someone. People love to build heroes until they can bury them. Put him in the car, the marshal said. 2 officers gripped his arms. Douglas didn't resist. He let them move him like dead weight. Silent. Calm. Watching. Memorizing every movement, every angle. 2 police cruisers. 1 black SUV. 3 officers had badges. 1 didn't. That was the intel guy, wearing casual clothes, standing too straight, eyes too alert. Federal, probably NSA or DIA. Which meant this wasn't just a domestic call. It was political. He was tossed into the back of the SUV. Door slammed. No words. No explanation. Not yet. The station smelled like old coffee and the lies of 100 failed interrogations. Douglas was led into a cold, windowless room with 1 flickering fluorescent light and a table bolted to the floor. The cuffs stayed on as they sat him down. Then came the waiting game. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Still no one. He sat still, arms on the table, fingers flexing slightly against the cuffs. He could have broken them if he wanted. He'd done it before, once in a warehouse in Lebanon. But this wasn't the time. No, this game was different. This time, he wasn't behind enemy lines. He was inside the system, and the system had turned on him. The door finally opened. A man in a cheap suit walked in with a folder. Behind him came a female officer, stone-faced, clipboard in hand. The suit sat down across from him. Douglas Lacey, he said, as if confirming a name no one else dared whisper. You tell me, Douglas replied flatly. The man smirked, then opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. He slid it across the table like it was a playing card. Recognize him? Douglas looked. Gregory Stevens. Rose's father. Golf shirts, fake Rolex, high-volume voice. Arrogant enough to call himself a self-made man after inheriting 3 car dealerships. The photo showed Gregory face down in a pool of blood in what looked like a garage. Entry wound to the head. Execution style. Dead, the man said, unnecessarily. Pity, Douglas replied, expression blank. The woman behind him stiffened. The agent leaned in. You 2 didn't get along, did you? Douglas gave a one-shoulder shrug. Man had the spine of a snake and the charm of a wet napkin. He disapproved of your career. No, he disapproved of me existing. He called you a trained killer. Said he feared for his daughter. Funny, he's the one who gave her to me. The man smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. You were overseas until 3 a.m. today. But Gregory was found dead 3 days ago. Shot in the back of the head. No sign of forced entry. Security system disabled by someone who knew the code. Douglas leaned forward. You bringing me in for time travel or murder? Don't get cute. Douglas stared him down. I'm not the one making up bedtime stories to impress a badge. The agent's smile vanished. He closed the folder, then stood. Your wife says you threatened him before your last deployment. That you said, and I quote, "Why get back, I'll clean house." She must have heard that from Kenneth Richmond, maybe while she was under him. The officer behind them finally cracked. Her lips twitched, but she quickly looked down at her clipboard. The agent didn't respond. He just nodded to the officer. Take him to holding. An hour later, Douglas sat in a holding cell with 2 other men, junkies too strung out to recognize the apex predator in the room with them. The mumbled pace begged for water. Douglas just sat, silent, still, mind churning. They were setting him up. Rose, Richmond, Gregory's death. Too clean, too fast. You don't get arrested for a murder that happened 3 days ago when you were overseas unless someone is trying to erase your alibi before you can use it. And he'd seen it all before. Not in courtrooms, not in America, but in war zones. This was when information op looked like precise, coordinated, and cold. And whoever was behind it didn't just want him imprisoned. They wanted him erased. The trial was fast-tracked. High profile. Cameras everywhere. A decorated Black Ops veteran accused of assassinating his own father-in-law. The media couldn't resist. News anchors dragged his name through headlines with feigned sorrow. From soldier to suspect, a hero's fall, murder, and PTSD. Was Gregory Stevens silenced? They showed his deployment photos, interviews with neighbors, even footage of Rose crying outside court in a designer scarf. I love Doug, she said, voice trembling perfectly for the cameras. But after everything, I'm scared of him now. Oscar-worthy. Douglas sat through it all like a statue. Never flinched. Never cracked. His attorney, public defender, burned out and overwhelmed, urged him to take a plea. I didn't kill anyone, Douglas said. Doesn't matter, the lawyer muttered. They're making you the villain. They got motive, timeline, character witnesses. I said, Douglas repeated, low and dangerous. I didn't kill anyone. The lawyer gulped and didn't argue again. Then came the moment that shattered what little held Douglas together. The door to the courtroom opened, and Holly walked in. His daughter, his world. She was dressed formally. A little blazer, hair in a ponytail. She looked older than 11 in that moment. Too old, too polished. Eyes dulled, his stomach twisted. She didn't look at him. She took the stand. The prosecutor, a slick-haired man with a smirk too wide, crouched in front of her like he was some kind of friendly school counselor. Can you tell us what you remember, sweetheart? Holly nodded slowly. Daddy was angry, she said, voice small. Douglas sat still. He said Grandpa was a problem, and that he was trained to kill problems. There was a silence in the courtroom that crushed oxygen. The jury watched her like she was made of glass. Douglas didn't move, didn't blink. But inside, something snapped. Not loudly, not emotionally, but coldly, like a predator waking up after a long hibernation. He told me Grandpa was a problem, and he's trained to kill problems. Chapter 3. The setup was beautiful. Douglas sat alone in the holding cell, elbows on his knees, back straight, eyes fixed on the wall across from him. The cell stank of bleach and defeat, but Douglas wasn't here in his mind. He wasn't thinking about the cameras, the court, or even the weight of his daughter's words. He was thinking 6 months back, because this didn't start today. No, this started the moment he got his deployment orders. It was raining the day the mission came in. Not the casual kind, either. It was the kind of storm that hammered against the windows like it was trying to get in and tear everything down from the inside. Douglas was in the garage, tuning the carburetor on his Mustang when his encrypted satellite phone lit up. Mission code, November Hammer. Deployment, classified. Duration, 6 months. Status, immediate. He didn't flinch, didn't sigh, didn't even blink. just set his wrench down and wiped the grease from his hands like a soldier preparing his own coffin. But something about this mission scratched at the back of his mind. It wasn't the destination. Kazakhstan wasn't a vacation, but it wasn't his first rodeo. It was the timing. Too sudden. No build-up. No ramp. No confirmation meetings. Just go. Now. That's not how Black Ops worked. Even ghosts had routines. He remembered walking back into the house that night, shaking the water from his jacket. Rose was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine, red, expensive, the kind she only opened when she felt like showing off. She looked up, eyebrows already raised. Another mission? He nodded. She didn't say anything. No protest. No tears. Just turned away and sipped. That was red flag number 1. Rose used to fight him on every deployment. Not because she cared about the job, but because she didn't like being left alone. This time, nothing. Cold silence. Like she already knew. That night, in bed, she didn't touch him. She didn't even face him. Just curled into herself like he was already gone. He stared at the ceiling until dawn. That's when he started taking mental notes. He began checking small things. Passwords on shared devices had been changed. Her phone had a new lock screen. Credit card purchases from boutiques she never mentioned. Receipts in the trash with Kenneth Richmond's firm logo on them. Rose hadn't just checked out emotionally. She had shifted alliances. Then came Gregory. The arrogant bastard stopped by the day before Douglas deployed. Patted him on the shoulder like he was some retiree and not a war-hardened operator with more confirmed kills than Gregory had business deals. You know, Doug, he said, sipping his scotch, a man can only serve 2 masters for so long. The flag or the family. Douglas met his eyes. Some of us serve without needing a parade after. Gregory grinned, that politician's grin. The one that never quite reached his eyes. Rose deserves more than a flag and folded dreams. Douglas didn't answer. He just smiled politely and made a mental note of the second man in his life who had recently forgotten he was dealing with a lion. Later that night, as he packed his go bag, Douglas opened a locked drawer in his office. Inside was a slim black case, something even Rose didn't know existed. Inside that, a burner laptop, a flash drive, 2 bugging devices, and a small recording mic designed to look like a coin. Protocol Wolf's Fawn. It was something he'd put together years ago, a fail-safe plan, just in case they try something planned, not for terrorists, not for foreign threats, but for this, for betrayal at home. And now, the hairs on the back of his neck weren't just standing. They were screaming. Before he left for the mission, he activated 3 dead drop systems. One in a storage unit under a fake name. Another inside a disabled iPhone hidden in the guest room air vent. The third, embedded in his Mustang's trunk panel, a hidden GPS dashcam synced to a cloud server only he had access to. He also made a final call, not to any friend or commander, but to an old contact from his days in Cairo. If something happens to me, he said calmly, send the letter. Use the black envelope. Drop it where we agreed. The voice on the other end said nothing. Just a click. Kazakhstan was war. But even in the middle of that fire, Douglas never stopped thinking. And during a debrief midway through the operation, something happened that tied it all together. A contact at an airstrip in Karagandhi handed him a thumb drive wrapped in rubber. Found this in chatter. Name popped up, the man said. Didn't think much of it, but figured you'd want to see. Douglas waited until he was alone to check it. Encrypted files, emails, transcripts, flagged phrases. But one name appeared more than once. Kenneth Richmond, his wife's friend, the legal vulture who'd shown up like a roach whenever Gregory had money trouble. Richmond had been communicating covertly with someone flagged by U.S. intelligence. No details, just enough to set off the alarm bells in Douglas's head like war drums. And then there it was, a coded message dated 2 weeks before Douglas deployed. When he's out of country, we move forward. Gregory's out. Rose files. We bury him with the rest. That sentence alone turned Douglas's blood to ice. Gregory's out. That sounded a hell of a lot like someone was planning a hit. But it wasn't him they wanted to pin it on. It was him they wanted to blame. He didn't report the file. Didn't send it up the chain. Because if what he suspected was true, then this wasn't just domestic betrayal. This was a setup. A well-funded, carefully orchestrated takedown meant to leave him disarmed, dishonored, and completely cut off from the only institution he'd ever trusted, the military. He flew home with two things in his pocket, a fake smile and a kill switch. The moment he landed, he expected something to go wrong. What he didn't expect was that they'd make it this obvious. Rose was gone. Gregory was dead. Richmond was living in his old house with smug confidence. The arrest? Practically waiting for him. But if they thought Douglas was just going to lie down and play the scapegoat, they didn't understand who they were dealing with. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a man who built traps for people who thought they were too smart to get caught. And now they were standing inside one. They just hadn't heard the door slam shut behind them yet. You don't set a trap for the lion. You just hope it's not watching you when you do. Chapter 4. The Courtroom Circus. Courtroom 7B smelled like wood polish, desperation, and cheap perfume. Douglas Lacey sat in the defendant's chair, back straight, hands folded neatly on the table. To his left, a scrawny public defender fidgeted nervously, adjusting his tie every 5 minutes like he was choking on the weight of the case. But Douglas? Douglas was calm, not out of peace, but calculation. He watched everyone like a hawk watches a field full of rabbits. Not one move went unnoticed. Across the courtroom sat Rose, his wife in name only, draped in a conservative black dress, makeup flawlessly done to give her the appearance of grief. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue that had barely touched her skin. Every tear was performative. Every whimper was weaponized. Next to her sat Kenneth Richmond, smug bastard in a navy three-piece suit, eyes locked on Douglas like he'd already won. His fingers tapped on the table rhythmically, confidence in human form. You could practically smell the cologne and corruption bleeding off him. Behind them sat a gallery full of vultures, press, local looky-loos, and a handful of whispering jurors who couldn't wait to turn this circus into a public lynching. But the worst part? The part that made Douglas's stomach turn in ways no battlefield ever had? Holly, his daughter, 11 years old, dressed in a pale yellow dress that Rose probably picked out for innocence optics. Her face was pale, empty, like someone had drained her soul and replaced it with media sound bites. She wouldn't even look at him, and he didn't blame her. He blamed them. The prosecutor stood at the front of the courtroom, pacing with the smug energy of a man who thought this was an easy win. He was younger than Douglas expected, sharp jawline, clean haircut, and the kind of overly dramatic delivery that suggested he practiced his closing arguments in a mirror. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice slow and deliberate. We are not here to disrespect Mr. Lacey's military service. We are here to question what that service may have turned him into. Douglas didn't move, just tilted his head slightly. The prosecutor continued, gesturing toward him. This is not a story of medals and missions. This is the story of a man who came back broken, violent, unhinged. A man trained to kill. A man who, upon returning from a classified mission, walked into his home, found betrayal, and retaliated the only way he knew how. He paused, a bullet to the back of his father-in-law's head. The gallery murmured. Rose whimpered. The prosecutor turned and pointed to a blown-up crime scene photo on a stand. Gregory's body, pool of blood, cold garage, a precise shot. No signs of forced entry. Security system bypassed. Only one person in the family had the tactical skill, the motive, and the emotional trigger to carry out that hit, Douglas Lacey. The jury watched the prosecutor like he was telling a bedtime story. Rose took the stand. Her voice quivered just enough to seem authentic, like a well-practiced monologue. He was angry, she said. Different after every deployment, colder, more distant. I wanted to help him. I tried, but he'd shut down. And when he found out about the divorce, her voice caught. A single tear rolled down. I thought he'd hurt me. I knew he'd go after my father. Douglas kept his eyes on her the entire time. She didn't look back once. Cowards rarely did. Next came Richmond, acting like a humble professional. I only ever tried to support Rose and Holly, he said, with that perfectly measured lawyer tone. Gregory was like family to me. We were business partners. His death devastated us all. He looked over at Douglas with that sideways smirk. But it didn't surprise me. Doug never liked Greg. He said once that he'd handle it when he got back. Another lie, delivered like gospel. They brought in a therapist next, one who'd never even evaluated Douglas, but had reviewed behavioral reports. He presents symptoms of unchecked PTSD, aggression, paranoia, isolation. These can lead to impulsive violence. Douglas muttered under his breath. The lawyer elbowed him. Douglas leaned closer and whispered, "You're not helping your case." The lawyer whispered back, "Neither are you." Then, the moment everyone waited for. Holly took the stand. Douglas's chest tightened as he watched her walk up, hands fidgeting in her lap, eyes glassy. She looked small. Too small for this room. Too small for what they'd forced her to do. The prosecutor knelt beside her like some kind of savior. "Do you remember anything your dad said before he left for his mission?" She hesitated. Eyes flicked toward Rose. Douglas noticed. She was scared, coached, but she spoke anyway. "Daddy said Grandpa was a problem," Holly said, "and he's trained to kill problems." The courtroom fell into a hushed silence. Jurors shifted uncomfortably. The prosecutor gave a little satisfied nod. Richmond reached over and gave Rose's hand a comforting squeeze. Douglas felt none of it, because inside him, a switch flipped. The judge looked exhausted. A balding man in his 60s with permanent frown lines and a voice that had sentenced hundreds before Douglas. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "I think we've heard enough for today." He turned toward the defense table. "Mr. Lacey, before we proceed to jury deliberation, you are granted the opportunity to address this court." The gallery leaned in. Reporters flipped on recorders. The prosecutor smirked, sure this would be the part where the unhinged veteran lost control and buried himself. Even Rose looked up now, waiting for him to crack, waiting for the rage, waiting for the outburst. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Do you have anything to add, Mr. Lacey?" Douglas looked up and smiled. Chapter 5. The One Paper. The courtroom was still holding its breath. Douglas Lacey sat like a coiled shadow in his chair. The gallery leaned forward, the judge waited, and everyone expected him to speak, to rage, to confess, or to crack under the crushing weight of the accusations. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his charcoal gray jacket and pulled out a single, slim, sealed envelope. Dark brown, military grade, stamped in red, classified, level 7, eyes only, do not duplicate. Douglas didn't say a word. He stood, stepped forward slowly, calm, methodical, not a trace of tremble in his hands, and walked up to the bench, ignoring his lawyer's wide-eyed protests. Two bailiffs tensed. One even reached for his baton. The judge held up a hand. "Let him approach." Douglas laid the sealed envelope on the bench. No dramatics, no speech, just a look, a cold, emotionless glance straight into the judge's eyes, and then he returned to his seat. The judge stared at the envelope like it might explode. His gavel hand hovered, uncertain. "What is this?" Douglas spoke for the first time all morning. His voice was low, calm, controlled. "A contingency plan, Your Honor. Authorized before I deployed." The courtroom stirred. Rose leaned forward in her chair, brows knitting. Richmond muttered something to the defense attorney beside him. Even Holly's head lifted slightly. The judge looked at the sealed flap. A long pause. Then he peeled the flap open. Silence. As the judge began to read, his expression shifted. His lips stopped moving halfway through the first paragraph. The color drained from his face, like someone had just whispered a death sentence in his ear. He read further and further. Then he froze and stood. The judge didn't speak at first. He just grabbed the microphone, hand shaking slightly, and leaned into it. No one moves. The courtroom blinked in confusion. "Lock the courtroom. Now." Gasps. Doors slammed. Two bailiffs rushed to bolt the main exit. Another radioed for backup. Reporters started shouting questions, cameras flashing. The courtroom exploded into a storm of panic and noise. And then, like a scythe through chaos, the double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. In walked 4 men in black. Military police. Full tactical gear. Sidearms holstered. Radios squawking. And behind them came a ghost. Gregory Stevens. Alive. Not limping. Not hidden. Not weak. Walking. Talking. Smirking. dressed in a pressed gray suit, expensive watch on his wrist, sunglasses tucked into his shirt pocket. Not a hint of death about him. Not even a scar. You could feel the air get sucked out of the room. "Is this a joke?" someone shouted. Rose stood up, face pale, mascara running. Hand clutched her chest like she'd seen Satan himself. "Dad?" Gregory looked right at her. His smirk deepened. "Hi, Pumpkin." She staggered back in her chair like she'd been slapped. Kenneth Richmond stood too. This isn't possible. You're supposed to be dead." Gregory's voice rang through the courtroom with casual venom. "Yeah, that was the idea." Richmond's face went white. Douglas didn't move, didn't blink, didn't smile. But his eyes devoured every second of their panic. The judge slammed his gavel again. Order in the courtroom. But it was futile. Reporters were screaming. The jury was whispering like bees in a jar. Holly sat frozen, her mouth open, tears pooling in confusion. Rose looked like her entire world had just gone up in flames. And Richmond? He was backing away slowly from the defense table like he could melt into the wood. Douglas finally turned his head, looked straight at Richmond, and in the silence between heartbeats, Richmond broke. "You set me up," he whispered. "You goddamn bastard." Douglas said nothing. Didn't need to. His eyes said it all. "I warned you not to play games with someone trained to end them." Gregory stepped up to the bench and handed the judge his ID. The judge looked like he was aging by the second. Where have you been?" Gregory tapped the envelope still open on the judge's desk. "That document gives you full clearance." Operation Cerberus was never about Kazakhstan. It was about cleaning up internal corruption. "I volunteer to go ghost." Douglas was the bait. He looked over at Douglas with a nod of respect, and the trap worked beautifully. Someone in the jury gasped audibly. The prosecutor was frozen, mouth half open, a stack of false narratives dying on his lips. Douglas finally rose from his seat, still quiet, still composed. He walked over to his daughter, who was now trembling in her seat. He knelt in front of her, spoke softly. "Holly, look at me." She did, tears streaming, breathing shaky. "I never hurt your grandpa," he said, "and I never stopped loving you." Her lip trembled, but Mom said. He gently shook his head. "I know." He didn't blame her. He never blamed her. The courtroom began to still. The judge sat back, hand on his forehead, the weight of everything crashing onto him. Bailiffs held the doors. Reporters begged to be let out to file breaking news. The walls felt like they were pulsing with adrenaline. Gregory looked over at his daughter, Rose. Hope Richmond was worth it. She couldn't respond. Didn't even try, because her whole face had shattered into disbelief. Everything she'd built on betrayal dissolved in seconds. Douglas finally returned to the center of the room. All eyes on him, all voices silenced. No smile this time, no rage either. Just that signature stillness of a man who let others swing the sword they thought would kill him, then handed them the bill for sharpening it. Chapter 6. Truth is a Weapon. The courtroom had shifted from chaos to shell shock. After Gregory Stevens, very much alive, stepped forward after the military sealed the exits, and after Douglas Lacey dropped the one piece of evidence that shattered the prosecution's entire case like glass, what followed felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a controlled detonation. Gregory took the witness stand, straightened his suit, glanced toward his daughter, Rose, with a disdainful curl of the lip. Then he nodded to the judge. "Ready when you are." The judge, still visibly rattled, leaned into the mic. "Please state your name for the record." "Gregory Allen Stevens. Businessman, former contractor to the Department of Defense. Also," he paused, then glanced over at Douglas, "a participant in Operation Janus, a counterintelligence sting jointly greenlit by Homeland, the CIA, and certain undisclosed international partners." Murmurs broke out in the gallery. The judge blinked. "Mr. Stevens, you were reported dead." "I know. I wrote the report." The judge coughed. "Under what authority?" Gregory reached into his inner coat pocket and produced a secondary document, thicker than Douglas's, stamped in red and gold foil. The judge's eyes widened. Well, shit. He wasn't the only one reeling. Rose sat stiffly, eyes vacant. Kenneth Richmond, her so-called savior, was visibly sweating. His necktie had somehow become a noose. Douglas, meanwhile, remained stone still. Not gloating, not proud, just watching, calculating, like a sniper watching the pieces fall exactly where he placed them. Gregory cleared his throat. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the court, you've been watching a show. What I'm about to tell you isn't drama. It's war, and I was the bait. He turned to the jury, folding his hands calmly on the witness stand. 3 years ago, my business partner, Mr. Kenneth Richmond, began shifting funds between various shell companies overseas. Small transfers at first, hidden in consulting fees, property acquisitions, charity donations. Nothing flashy, but they weren't going to the Cayman Islands or Luxembourg. They were going to Belgrade, then Kazan, then Dalian. He let that hang. The prosecutor stood, flustered. Your Honor, we were not. Sit down, the judge snapped. The prosecutor sat. Gregory continued. The money trail caught the attention of our boys in Langley. Meanwhile, something darker was happening behind the curtain. Richmond and I had connections in the defense world. Through my daughter Rose, we had proximity to multiple military families. And through her, so did he. Gasps echoed through the crowd again. Rose's face twisted. What are you saying? Gregory shot her a glare that shut her up instantly. Don't, he snapped. You played your role. Now you live with it. He shifted back to the judge. These two, Richmond and Rose, weren't just scheming for wealth. They were laundering access. You see, when soldiers deploy for long-term black ops missions, they often sign NDAs, give spousal power of attorney, and surrender communication. Their wives back home become the closest thing to operational windows. He gestured loosely, and these two used that. Rose seduced other soldiers' wives, emotionally or financially, got them to open up. Richmond's people posed as business investors, therapists, or security consultants. Meanwhile, they were siphoning military data from unknowing households. Nothing that had raised flags, just logistics, names, troop movements, supply chains. Enough to build profiles. Douglas narrowed his eyes. He knew all this, but hearing it spoken aloud had a certain razor edge to it. Why fake your death? The judge asked. Gregory shrugged. Because Douglas needed room to move, and I needed a funeral no one would question. Now all eyes turned to Lacey. He sat unmoving, fingers clasped, watching Richmond like a chess master waiting for the final twitch. Gregory pointed to him. This man risked everything. While Richmond thought he was dead or deployed, Lacey was hunting. He tapped phones, bribed a cartel runner tied to their crypto accounts, even hacked into Richmond's burner phones through a contact in Bogota. He smiled slightly. Every call, every file, every text, logged, time-stamped, encrypted, then sent to a shadow server authorized by the Pentagon. The judge leaned back in his chair, as if the air had just been knocked from his lungs. Are you telling me? Gregory cut in. I'm telling you Douglas Lacey is the reason we caught the bastards behind this foreign-backed domestic spy op. He looked directly at the jury now. Richmond and Rose weren't just cheating on a marriage. They were cheating the country. They were going to destroy lives and flee, cashed out, protected by a handful of dirty foreign diplomats. But they underestimated the man they betrayed. All eyes turned back to Douglas. This time, even Holly looked confused, torn, like her entire belief system was shifting beneath her. Douglas slowly rose. One word, one look. He walked toward the witness stand, not to testify, but to take his time walking past Rose and Richmond. Their betrayal? Not a wound anymore. It was evidence. As he passed Richmond, he paused, just long enough for only him to hear. You thought I was hunting shadows. You were the shadow. Then, finally, Douglas turned to the judge and gave his one line. I was deep in enemy territory. You just didn't realize. He looked around the courtroom at Rose, Richmond, the reporters, even the stunned jury. Then his gaze settled back on the judge. I meant here, Chapter 7, Justice, Douglas style. The silence in the courtroom didn't last long. As Douglas delivered his final line, I was deep in enemy territory. You just didn't realize I meant here. The air changed. It wasn't just a metaphor anymore. This room was the battlefield, and he had just executed the mission with military precision. The judge sat back in stunned silence, lips parted, barely blinking. Then came the unmistakable clack of his gavel slamming down like a war drum. "Bailiffs," he barked, "secure both defendants immediately. And I want U.S. Marshals on standby." Two uniformed officers stepped up behind Rose and Kenneth Richmond before they could react. One grabbed Richmond by the shoulder hard. The other twisted Rose's wrist behind her back and slapped cold steel around them. What the hell are you doing?" Richmond shouted, thrashing. "This is illegal. You have no right." The judge's voice cut through like a blade. "You're under arrest for espionage, conspiracy against the state, treason, and wire fraud, Mr. Richmond. And Mrs. Lacey, you're facing the same." Rose's mouth opened, but nothing came out, just a strangled whimper. She turned to Douglas, disbelief painting her face like a mask of melting porcelain. "You set me up," she breathed. "You used me." Douglas didn't flinch. "No, Rose. I gave you every chance to walk away from this. You chose to sell me out. You chose to sell out the country." His tone was cold, crisp. "You made your bed. Now get hauled out of it." The entire courtroom watched in stunned silence as Rose and Richmond were dragged away, their faces a mix of rage and disbelief. Richmond still tried to twist out of the officer's grip. "You don't know who I work with," he roared. "You think this ends with a courtroom? I've got people." Another officer shoved him through the side doors before he could finish that threat. Then, like a dam breaking, the courtroom erupted into applause. The gallery, the same crowd that had gawked at Douglas like a monster days earlier, was now on their feet. Reporters, veterans, families, even a few off-duty cops clapped and hollered, some with tears in their eyes. The judge banged the gavel again, but this time it was more ceremonial than disciplinary. This court recognizes Mr. Douglas Lacey as an innocent man and a commendable patriot. Charges are dismissed. Douglas remains standing, composed, stoic, his jaw tight, his eyes focused. The weight of 6 months of lies, betrayal, and war, both foreign and domestic, didn't just lift off his shoulders. He had crushed it beneath his boots. But it wasn't over. Not for him. "Holly." He turned just in time to see his daughter sitting on the far side of the gallery, sobbing quietly into her hands. A guard had led her to a bench once Rose was cuffed. Her entire world had cracked. She looked up and met his eyes. And just like that, Douglas wasn't the soldier anymore. He was just a father. He walked over slowly, controlled, deliberate, each step unsure but firm. "Holly," he said quietly. She looked up, red-eyed, broken. "I didn't know," she whispered. I thought you killed him. Mom told me you were dangerous, that you'd snapped, that Grandpa was going to turn you in and you lost control." Douglas crouched beside her, eyes level. "And you believed her." She bit her lip. "You were always gone. Then you came back, colder. I thought you hated us." He exhaled through his nose. "No, I hated what she became, not you." She looked down at her hands, tears streaming freely now. "I said those things in court because I thought I was protecting people. But I was just a pawn, wasn't I?" Douglas nodded once. "Yeah, you were. But you're not anymore." She sniffed, eyes darting back to his. "Can you ever forgive me?" He didn't answer immediately. Not because he couldn't, but because forgiveness wasn't a switch. It was a battlefield of its own. "I'm your father," he finally said. "And I never stopped being that. But I'm not going to lie to you. It's going to take time." She nodded quickly, ashamed. "But Holly," he added, voice low and steady, "you don't have to earn my love. Just to trust again. That. We rebuilt. That broke her." She lunged forward, wrapped her arms around him, and sobbed against his chest. The courtroom faded away. The applause, the flashbulbs, the stares, all gone. Just a father and daughter, wrapped in each other's grief. After a few moments, a shadow loomed nearby. It was the judge, now standing, robe gathered like a cloak. His voice was gruff, but soft enough to show humility. "Mr. Lacey," he said. Douglas stood, straightening slowly. The judge extended a hand. "I owe you an apology. A serious one. I allowed this courtroom to become a circus. I bought the narrative without questioning the source. That ends today." Douglas looked down at the offered hand, then took it. "You were doing your job," he replied. "Just next time, remember, war doesn't always wear uniform." The judge blinked at that, then nodded. Damn right. He turned to leave, but paused. There'll be federal press outside. If you don't want to deal with it, I can have you escorted out the back. Douglas shook his head. No, sir. Let them see me. Let them know exactly who I am. The judge smiled faintly and stepped away. The moment Douglas exited the courtroom into the marble lobby, the air outside exploded. Shouts, cameras, microphones shoved in his face. Mr. Lacey, how long were you undercover? Is it true you worked directly with Homeland Security? What do you say to Americans who thought you were guilty? Was your wife's betrayal personal or part of the mission? Douglas raised a hand. One sentence. Calm. Cold. You can run headlines. I ran operations. Then he walked through them like Moses parting the Red Sea. But deep inside, it wasn't over. The courtroom had seen justice. But Douglas? Douglas wasn't done. Because for him, this had never been just about clearing his name. It was about sending a message. That betrayal of country or family comes with a cost. And he was the collector. Chapter 8. Cleaning house. Douglas Lacey didn't disappear after the courtroom victory. No, that was just the public exoneration, the formal paperwork, the handshakes and fake apologies. But behind the scenes, that's where the real operation began. The mission begins. It started with a quiet meeting in a darkened hangar just outside Quantico. No uniforms, no rank, just men in shadows and silence. One step forward, older, stern eyes, wore the posture of a man who'd seen too much and said too little. Lacey, he said, we owe you. Douglas didn't blink. Then let me finish what I started. The man handed him a sleek black folder. No words, no signature, just one label. Operation, Clean House Target 1. Judge Harold Bream, the judge who'd fast-tracked Douglas's indictment, took the media spotlight like a crack addict with a camera. He'd ruled fast, loud, and dirty. What people didn't know, he had offshore accounts, shell corporations tied to Eastern Europe, and a taste for underage girls, kept silent with hush money funneled through legal settlements. Douglas sent one anonymous drop to a Baltimore journalist, a second to a senator with re-election ambitions. Within 72 hours, the judge resigned for health reasons. Within 10 more, the FBI raided his estate. By day's end, Judge Bream was found in a luxury condo bathroom, alive, but overdosed on a cocktail of pills and vodka. Suicide attempt. Or maybe guilt. Did Douglas push him? No, he just brought the mirror closer. Target 2. Senator Clay Trumbull had been a respected figure. Patriot image. TV-friendly. Military flags in every photo. But he'd funneled contracts to Kenneth Richmond's fake consulting firms for years. Oversaw defense budgets, while shaving billions for kickbacks. Douglas walked into his gala fundraiser in a black suit. No invitation. Just a presence no one dared question. As the senator took the stage, Douglas stood near the bar, quietly uploading the entire contents of Trumbull's encrypted laptop to a live server. Emails, call logs, photos of meetings in Prague. One file labeled Domestic Assets, Mill Families. The screen behind the senator, meant to play a tribute video, flickered, then glitched, then flipped to his own crimes. In real time, guests gasped. Phones came out. Security scrambled. Douglas sipped his drink. By morning, the senator was under investigation. By nightfall, gone from the political map. Target 3. Milton Greaves, CEO, Corporate Shark. Smiling face of family tech innovation. Secret backdoor seller of biometric data from deployed soldiers. Sold it to foreign buyers with Rose and Richmond brokering deals. Douglas didn't show up to his office. He showed up to his son's charity gala. The same charity Greaves used to launder government contracts. Greaves spotted him from across the room, face going pale. You shouldn't be here, he muttered, approaching quickly. This is private. So if it was my family, Douglas replied flatly. You sold those too. Security tried to step in. Douglas handed each one of them a flash drive and kept walking. Every major guest at that gala received a package the next morning, documents, wire transfers, hacked internal memos. One file proved Greaves paid his son's nonprofit workers with defense slush money. The stock plummeted. Greaves? Arrested mid-board meeting. Collateral damage. Douglas never drew blood. He didn't need to. His bullets were truth. His blade was exposure. And he wielded it with surgical precision. One by one, the spiderweb collapsed. Those who weren't arrested were ruined. Their families disowned them. Their names became synonymous with betrayal. Their legacies erased. Whispers and warnings soon. The whispers started in elite circles. Lacey's not done. Don't answer unknown numbers. He knows everything. Someone tried to reach out, offering Douglas hush money through a shell account in Dubai. He replied by leaking the account to Interpol. Another tried to frame him for a different crime, sloppy attempt at forging financial records. Douglas responded by flying out the forger's ex-wife. She testified in 3 languages, buried them with facts. An unofficial visit weeks into the operation. A black SUV pulled up outside his safe house. Same military man from Quantico. No smile this time. You've dismantled over 12 assets. Judges, senators, CEOs. You've made more noise than 10 congressional hearings. Douglas said nothing. The man tilted his head. Do we need to shut this down? Douglas looked up slowly. No, you just need to stay out of the way. A long pause, then a nod. The SUV drove off. Holly's letter one night. Amid the ashes of ruined empires, Douglas returned to his quiet cabin. On the table, a letter from Holly. Dad, I don't know where to start, but I've watched every move you've made since that trial. And I know now. I know what you were fighting for. You're not a monster. You're the only one who didn't lie to me. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. He folded the letter, tucked it in his vest, right over his heart. Maybe one day. Final target. The puppet master Douglas had saved one name for last. A quiet man, unremarkable on the surface. A logistics contractor named Elias Van. But Van had brokered every deal, pulled every string, moved money through dead countries and burned banks. Never left a trace. Until now, Douglas found him hiding in a luxury retirement villa in the Caymans under a fake name. He didn't kick in the door, didn't make a scene. He simply sat at the bar next to Van and ordered a drink. Van froze. He whispered. Ow! Douglas didn't answer. Just placed a flash drive on the bar. Every account, every coded deal, every private message. Van looked like he might cry. You're not going to kill me? Douglas stared ahead. You get off too easy. He stood, left the flash drive, and walked away. 2 days later, the media exploded with leaked recordings of Van admitting to treason during a private yacht party. Interpol took him down in the middle of breakfast. No struggle, just surrender. The ghost walks alone back in the States. The headlines ran wild. Shadow Patriot brings down treason ring. Ghost operative cleans house. No survivors. The man who burned a network without firing a shot. And Douglas? He walked the streets with a hood up. Invisible. Unseen. But every corrupt bastard who once smiled at his downfall now triple-checked their emails. Watched every shadow. Because they knew he was still out there. Still watching. Still cleaning. And when someone tried to poke their head up again, he sent a note. No signature. Just one line. You aimed at a ghost. Now the ghost is hunting back. Chapter 9. The Rebuild. Douglas stood in the dim light of his cabin. The evening sun spilling through cracked blinds like shards of gold cutting through years of dust. The house was quiet. Too quiet for a man who had spent months orchestrating the fall of kings and tyrants. The kind of quiet that gnaws at your bones, reminding you that the fight might be over, but the cost was still tallied in empty spaces. He glanced at the worn wooden table, where a folded letter sat, a letter from Holly. She had sent it weeks ago, hesitant, unsure, like a girl learning to walk again after a fall. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded the page. Dad, I don't know where to start, but I've watched every move you've made since that trial. And I know now. I know what you were fighting for. You're not a monster. You're the only one who didn't lie to me. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Douglas swallowed hard. He wasn't a man known for softness. But this was the battlefield he'd wanted to win most. Reconnecting, when Holly walked through the door that afternoon, Douglas almost didn't recognize her. The wide-eyed girl who'd testified against him was gone. In her place stood a young woman, tall, confident, but still carrying the shadows of betrayal deep in her gaze. Dad, she said quietly, voice barely above the hum of the ceiling fan. He closed the folder, stood, and crossed the room. "Hey, kid," he said, voice rough but warm. She smiled, small and cautious. "You look tired." Douglas chuckled, a sound rusty from disuse. "You don't know the half of it." She walked closer, the distance between them shrinking with every heartbeat. "I've missed you. I've missed you too." They sat down. A long pause stretched. Finally, Holly broke the silence. "Mom said you were dangerous, that you'd lost control, that you weren't the man I thought you were." Douglas nodded. "She was trying to protect you, in her own way." Holly's eyes glistened with tears. "I believed her, and that's not your fault," Douglas said firmly. "You were a child caught in a storm you didn't create." Her voice cracked. "I was scared and confused, but I want to make it right." Douglas reached out, hand steady on her shoulder. "We start now. Training the next generation." Douglas wasn't just a soldier. He was a teacher. And now, Holly would learn the lessons he'd paid for in blood. He spent the next months with her, sharing knowledge rarely passed down. Situational awareness, tactical communication, emotional discipline, and the unbreakable code of loyalty. They trained in the woods behind the cabin, early mornings filled with the smell of pine and sweat. "Focus," Douglas barked during a firearms exercise. "Control your breathing. Your mind follows your body." Holly took the stance again, steadying her shaking hands. "Again," he said. She fired, hitting the target squarely in the center. "Good," Douglas nodded. Later, around the campfire, the conversation turned softer. "Why did you keep fighting, Dad, when they turned against you?" Douglas stared into the flames. "Because the truth was worth it. Because loyalty means more than blood sometimes." She nodded thoughtfully. "I want to live by that too." He smiled. "Then you're already on the right path." The estate, Gregory Stevens' estate, had been a fortress of secrets and shadows. But after the dust settled, it became Holly's inheritance. She walked through the grand halls, running her hand along polished wood panels, feeling the weight of generations behind her. "This place, it's more than just money or power," she told Douglas during their visit. He looked around, eyes sharp. "It's responsibility." Holly had already begun turning the estate into something new, a foundation to support military families and whistleblowers, those caught between duty and danger. Her vision was clear, a safe haven for truth, courage, and justice. Douglas watched her, pride mingled with relief. "You're turning pain into purpose." "That's the plan," she said, smiling. Cutting the last high rose had been a ghost in Holly's life for months. Letters ignored, calls unanswered, and finally a decision. One afternoon, Holly sat down with Douglas, the afternoon sun casting long shadows on the floor. "I'm done with her," she said simply. Douglas nodded. "Mom chose comfort over honor. You won't make that mistake." Holly's jaw tightened. "No, I won't." They both knew the scars Rose left weren't just emotional. They were wounds on their very foundation. But here, in this moment, they chose to build something stronger. A quiet exhale of the storm that had ravaged their lives was finally easing. Douglas stood outside the cabin one evening, looking at the horizon painted in twilight purples and fiery oranges. He took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, he exhaled without the weight of war pressing down on his chest. The fight for justice had been brutal. The betrayal had cut deep. But here now there was hope. Hope in a daughter's eyes. Hope in a legacy rebuilt. And hope that someday, maybe, the war was truly over. Chapter 10. Legacy of Fire. The room was quiet, save for the soft crackle of a burning cigar. Douglas Lacey leaned back in his worn leather chair, the amber glow flickering across his face like the embers of a long-fought war. He held the cigar loosely between his fingers, the smoke curling upward like whispered memories. In his other hand, he cradled a classified file, its cover marked boldly. Active Asset, D. Lacey. Years had passed since the courtroom drama, since the spy ring's fall, since the cleansing fire he'd set upon the traitors who tried to destroy him and his family. Yet the file wasn't gathering dust. It was a reminder that peace was a luxury and vengeance was something earned, hammered out in the shadows. He exhaled slowly, watching the smoke trail vanish into the dim light. The war was quieter now, but never gone. A message from the future. A soft ping from his encrypted phone broke the silence. Douglas swiped the screen and saw a new message. A photo. It was Holly, sharp and proud, standing tall in a crisp military intelligence uniform. In her hand, she held something that made Douglas's chest tighten. His old Black Ops badge, the same emblem he'd carried through missions in the dead of night. Her eyes sparkled with fierce determination, a reflection of the fire he'd ignited in her. A single line accompanied the image. Carrying the torch. Watch your six, Dad. Douglas smiled. That was all the confirmation he needed. Flashback. Graduation day. The crowd in the auditorium was buzzing, but Douglas's eyes were fixed on Holly. She stepped up to the podium with the poise of a seasoned soldier. Her speech was sharp, deliberate, a mix of honor, gratitude, and resolve. Today, I stand here not just as a graduate of the Military Intelligence Academy, but as a guardian of truth, a protector of those who cannot protect themselves, she said, voice ringing clear. Douglas's heart swelled as she spoke about loyalty, sacrifice, and legacy. The same values he'd tried to instill in her during those long nights of training, the quiet talks under stars, the unspoken lessons from scars old and new. When she finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Douglas's eyes glistened with pride. After the ceremony, Holly found him in the crowd. Dad, she said softly, handing him the Black Ops badge. I earned this, she said, and I earned the right to wear it because of you. Douglas took the badge, feeling the weight of it. More than metal and enamel, it was a symbol of survival, of battles fought in silence, of a legacy reborn. The weight of the badge. Back in his study, Douglas placed the badge beside the file on his desk. He lit another cigar, inhaling deep. You did good, kid, he murmured. His mind drifted to the past missions, the sleepless nights, the betrayals, the losses. He'd been a ghost in those days, an invisible soldier in a world that demanded secrecy. But now, through Holly, the legacy lived on. She wasn't just carrying a badge. She was carrying a torch, a promise, quiet resolve. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Holly. A video this time. She was in the field, crouched behind a crumbling wall in a foreign city, eyes sharp, headset crackling. Target acquired, she whispered into the mic, moving in. Douglas watched, heart pounding. His daughter was no longer the scared girl who'd testified in a courtroom. She was a hunter, a protector, legacy forged in fire. Douglas stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city lights flickered in the night, shadows stretching long and thin. He clenched his fist around the cigar. The fight wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. But now it was hers too. His daughter's war. And Douglas was ready. The final reflection. He looked back to the desk, eyes resting on the badge and file. He thought of the path that had brought him here, the betrayals, the courtroom battles, the secret operations, the redemption. A slow, cocky smile spread across his face. Some men retired. Others reloaded. Douglas Lacey was not a man to ever put the gun down for good.